Welcome back to Recruiting Blitz. My name is Tim Verghese. We appreciate you guys tuning in. Before we get started, be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel. We're in the midst of fall camp. We've had two open practice viewings so far. Be sure to check out our coverage over at InsideNebraska.com, as well as our coverage here on the YouTube channel. We've had some observations from practice. We have pictures and videos from practice, all uploaded to InsideNebraska.com and our YouTube page. So be sure to check all of that out. Recruiting's ramping up again slowly but surely after the brief summer vacation. Nebraska's kind of gearing up for the season, but also starting to kind of reach back out to 27 and 28 recruits. Start lining up some visits for the fall. Obviously, a handful of 26 targets out there as well for Nebraska, and so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time diving into any one particular thing this episode. I wanted to touch on a few headlines from the last week or so. Some stuff we already maybe touched on over at InsideNebraska.com if you're a subscriber, but a few things that might interest you as well. In terms of Nebraska's 26 board and 2027 board. So for one, late last week, Chad Simmons, Rivals Director of Recruiting, reported on 10 recruitments or 10 current 26 commitments that are on flip watch. He noted Miami four-star linebacker commit Jordan Campbell as one, and noted that Nebraska is the school that is kind of in the driver's seat in terms of the school's best position to flip him away. And so, kind of, we've talked a lot about Campbell over the last few months. Obviously, if you recall, was initially expected to officially visit Nebraska in June. After he made his official visit to Miami, he announced he was shutting down his commitment and canceled visits to Missouri and Nebraska, so those never happened. In the spring, he did visit Nebraska twice. He visited for Elite Junior Day, and he returned for Husker games back in April. And and if you've been reading or reporting over at InsideNebraska.com over the last few weeks, we've also been reporting that since, late June or so, that he was already potentially reconsidering those initial plans of shutting things down, rethinking his decision to shut things down. Wants to give a couple schools another shot this fall, and he still has a bunch of official visits available to him. He only took one. He only took that Miami visit, and so Nebraska is a school that, if he does choose to take some official visits, I think is very well positioned to get one. I think Auburn's very well positioned to potentially get an official visit from him. I think in-state Florida State's a school that could potentially get an official visit from him. Missouri's still in the running, Oregon in the running, Georgia in the running as well. I think Georgia's the biggest wild card of the schools trying to flip him away. And I should say this as well, just in general. It's going to be tough to flip him away from Miami. He's from Miami. He has no real reason at this point to flip away from the hometown Hurricanes. He likes the program. They've made it. Obviously they've ponied up for him to keep him in the class, to keep him from making some other visits as well. They really like him. They're really excited about his potential in their defense, and so whoever does flip him, if you're able to, it's going to take a lot. It's going to take making him feel at home, kind of home away from home. And Nebraska's done a good job of that with Philip Simpson, with Rob Dvorak, with Matt Rule, and so many players from South Florida on the roster as well. I think the relationships with Nebraska are strong. I think from the player side and the coach side. And the second part of this recruitment is going to be the financial element of this. You're going to have to spend up whoever does land him, whoever does end up getting his signature. You're going to have to spend for him. And this is the type of linebacker slash. He also has some edge potential as well. This is the type of prospect I think Nebraska is willing to pony up for. I do think they have a pretty competitive offer on the table. And I think they're going to be able to potentially negotiate even further going into the fall. So I'm interested to see how Nebraska approaches this in the fall. I think patience is required. I think the later in the year Nebraska gets them on campus, the better. I think this is a recruitment where you don't want to pull off the flip in September or October and run the risk of having to, potentially defend against Miami, defend against Georgia, defend up against Auburn. I think you want this to play out kind of like Cortez Mills' recruitment did last year, where as signing day gets closer, momentum starts to build, and then on signing day, you kind of pull it off. You pull off the flip. I think the closer you can get it done, closer to signing day you can get this done, the better for Nebraska's. just general chances. But I am interested to see how Nebraska approaches this because, again, like I said, the wild card in this recruitment, I think, is Georgia. If Georgia ponies up, if Georgia makes a real aggressive push for him, I think they're a school that absolutely can win him over. I think they are right now when it comes to linebacker play and defensive line play to some extent too. They are kind of the, and no pun intended, big dogs. Like they are the school that if they enter a linebacker recruitment, if they enter a defensive tackle recruitment right now, those players are paying attention and they're kind of willing to take a deal to go there, and willing to kind of take a bit of a pay cut to go there. So I think the real wild card is Georgia just because I do think there's some legitimate interest from on Campbell's end of if Georgia really wants him, I think that's where he'd want to be as well. Nebraska really wants him. He, has some pretty strong feelings about Nebraska, specifically potentially playing for Philip Simpson, potentially playing for Rob Dvorak, and Matt Rule. I do think he sees a fit in Nebraska's scheme as a kind of versatile linebacker. I do think ultimately Nebraska has to prove themselves on the field. I think that's a big question mark in Campbell's mind right now with the Huskers. I think a strong start to the year would greatly help their chances. I think a strong year in general, of course, would help their chances in a few recruitments. But this is one where I do think Campbell's going to have a very close eye on what Nebraska does in September and how they open the year, of course, against Cincinnati later this month. So that's a recruitment I've got a close eye on for heading into the fall. We've touched on a few other potential flip targets over the last few weeks. Cameron Wilson, of course, Nebraska still working to flip him away from Syracuse, Florida State working there, UCF working as their Mississippi State as well. So Nebraska battling a few schools to flip him away. To Darius Hughes, teammates with Jordan Campbell down there at Miami Northwestern. He's committed to Florida State. Nebraska's working to flip him away. Nebraska is also working to flip four-star safety Devin Jackson away from Oregon. Nebraska, of course, had the commitment from his high school teammate Danny Odom. Odom mentioned two rivals recently. He's working to flip bring Jackson with him to Nebraska, working to flip him away from Oregon. Also working on his 2027 teammate, Kamari Whitfield, another defensive back, I think has a chance to have a Odom type rise in his junior year. Odom really kind of took off and hopped on some colleges' radars as a junior this past fall. Whitfield, a 27 prospect, I think has a chance to do that this fall. So a guy Nebraska's in on early, a guy that Addison Williams was down to see at First Academy spring game and offered after that game, and a guy that, like I mentioned, Odom's working hard to bring with him. So I'm curious to see what happens there. I do expect Odom back on campus at least once this fall. I wouldn't be surprised if he's joined by one of, if not both of, Whitfield and Jackson. At some point this season. We talked a little bit about 27 DBs. In case you missed it last week, Greg Smith, former Inside Nebraska, recruiting insider, now a Rivals national analyst, primarily covering the Midwest, inputted a prediction for Nebraska to land 2027 four-star safety Torrey Pittman last week. Pittman from Omaha Central is a top-ranked prospect in the state in the 2027 cycle. Also the number two safety in the country. Per the Rivals industry rankings, also the number 16 player per Rivals. Just in general, one of the top players here in this 27 class, right in Nebraska's backyard. It's visited Nebraska a bunch. Right now on his Rivals profile, it lists him as having visited 6 times to date. It's a lot more than that. We don't have all of them properly reported through the spring. He was on campus almost once a week, if not more. He visited for a couple games last fall. I expect him to visit for at least one game here in the fall as well. And here's the situation with Pittman. I think you have to feel good about where Nebraska stands right now. He told me back in June, and we put that out over at InsideNebraska.com, that Nebraska was in his top two alongside LSU. Then he made a visit to LSU later in June, and that visit went well. He does really like the coaching staff there at LSU. Got the sense though from talking to him and talking to people close to him. Rivals Greg Smith did as well. That LSU just didn't really feel like the place. I think Baton Rouge in general, the state of Louisiana, just wasn't, compared to, Lincoln and some few other places he visited, didn't really like the city as much. And I don't know how big of a factor LSU will be in this recruitment moving forward. But that's not to say I did think he really enjoyed the staff and they are a program I'm going to keep watching in that recruitment. Just maybe I think it's opened up a little more beyond that top two at this point. He does want to make some visits this fall. I do expect him at places like Notre Dame. I do think he wants to try and make it out to Oregon. USC is now in the mix. Michigan's in the mix. Colorado's in the mix. I do expect some visits this fall. Oklahoma recently offered their school. I keep a close eye on. Oklahoma's had some success coming into Nebraska, battling Nebraska for some of their top players, or top in-state players. Christian Jones last cycle. If you remember a few cycles ago, they landed Caden Helms out of Bellevue West. They recruit Nebraska. So I would keep an eye on Oklahoma as a potential riser in that recruitment moving forward. And all that to say, I don't think a decision is imminent. I do think he wants to take his time with this. He wants to make a few visits this fall. Wants to see some place, go to some places he's never been before. But unlike Campbell, I think this is a recruitment where it's in Nebraska's best interest to get this done sooner rather than later. I think the sooner Nebraska can get him committed, the better, just because I think this is a recruitment that as it continues to play out, as he continues to make some of these visits elsewhere, I do think the draw of getting out of state could become more desirable. Nebraska wants to prevent that as much as possible. I think if it was up to Nebraska, if it was up to, Trey Taylor, who's been pretty vocally peer recruiting Pittman to join him in Lincoln, I think if it was up to the staff, I think they'd like to get it done this fall. And I think, again, like I said, it would be in Nebraska's best interest to get it done this fall. That's another recruitment where Nebraska gets some results. Nebraska shows some development in the secondary. Perhaps Deshaun Singleton pops up as a potential draft candidate. Potentially, you see a young DB like an Amari Sanders or a Caleb Benning or a Larry Tarbor and Andrew Marshall really pop up as a potential draft prospect as well. I think that would be good for Nebraska. I think that would really help Nebraska in this recruitment. As you know, I think the competition is just really starting to pick up for Pittman. But you like Nebraska's position heading into the 2025 season. Sticking in 27, we reported last week on a few visits and a few things just to keep an eye on. 2027 rising linebacker Zyke Scott tells me he's planning to visit for the Michigan game in September. I think that's a visit list. We've talked about it a few times. I think that's a visit list that's going to be pretty extensive for Nebraska. Going to be a key recruiting weekend. Trey Taylor already expected in town for that weekend. A few weeks ago in Timbits, we reported Bryson Brown, four-star cornerback out of Broken Arrows, planning to visit for that game. Wouldn't be surprised if he's joined by his teammate and fellow four-star defensive back Samaj Stanford, one of the top safeties in the Southeast, specifically the top safety out of Oklahoma in that 27 cycle. So wouldn't be surprised if those two, I'm expecting Brown for sure. Wouldn't be surprised if both of them are there. Taylor's already expected in town. Now we can add Zyke Scott to that visit list. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of Nebraska's top 26 flip targets and top 26 targets in general find themselves in town for that game as well. We've been going through Nebraska's early 2027 big board over at InsideNebraska.com. Be sure to check that out. Some reporting on a couple linebackers Nebraska's after recently, a couple edge targets and defensive line targets Nebraska's after. I think those boards are going to continue expanding into the season. And speaking of expanding, in case you missed it, Nebraska's expanded their recruiting staff a bit over the last couple of weeks. We reported on the hire of Anthony Johnson. Um, Back in July. He's now a recruiting coordinator. Nebraska's hired two recruiting coordinators over the past few weeks. One in Anthony Johnson. He was briefly on staff in Michigan, was primarily helping defensive line recruiting, and they went on a bit of a run. They landed Titan Davis, a name that's familiar to Nebraska fans, five-star edge rusher Carter Meadows. They landed Mikhail Glade out of Chicago, another name relatively familiar to Nebraska fans, had visited Nebraska, or the Nebraska staff had visited him, and there was some mutual interest there at one point this spring. And the hope is he comes to Nebraska, uses some of the connections he built at Michigan, was previously on staff at Pitt, uses some of those connections to help Nebraska get back into some of these defensive line recruitments, really help Terry Braden out a little bit, and maybe make a splash or two to close out this 2026 cycle along the defensive line. But he's going to have a bigger picture role, kind of working across the staff, assisting with relationship building, assisting in board building and evaluations across Nebraska staff. Nebraska also brought an alum home in Matt Pierce, hired as recruiting coordinator. This is more of an evaluation hire. He's been on staff at Coastal Carolina for the last 7 years. a guy that was key in Jamie Chadwell's kind of rise in that program and taking that program to the heights that they had under Chadwell. Of course, Chadwell's now at Liberty, and he's Pierce stuck on at Coastal Carolina, worked for Tim Beck over there. Was key to Coastal Carolina's Sun Belt Championship back in 2020. Obviously went on that run under Chadwell, and more recently helped them to kind of lead the Sun Belt in recruiting. They had the top recruiting class in 2024 in the conference. They've had some really smart evaluations, guys that have gone on to transfer to Power Four schools. One that Nebraska is going to see, Matthew McDoom, in Game 1 against Cincinnati, where they expect him to start in the secondary for Cincinnati. He was originally a strong eval and land for Coastal Carolina under Matt Pierce. A few other guys, of course, Coastal Carolina has a few guys in the league right now, a few guys across the Power Four that have transferred from Coastal Carolina or played at Coastal Carolina at one point. So really like that addition. I think that's a guy that's really going to boost Nebraska's evaluation capability. They do a really strong job of finding some hidden gems, but more so than ever when you're trying to find the little wins both in the transfer portal and in the high school ranks, and maybe get a guy on a discount, or maybe our early on a recruitment evaluations are more important than ever. Even, maybe when the casual fan or the average person thinks it's all about spending. I mean, the best way to spend right now is to find the deals, and the deals are in strong evaluations. If you find a guy early, you can maybe get him at a discount. A guy you think maybe is an elite defensive lineman, if you're early on him, you can maybe get him at a discount. It's about opening up those opportunities to maybe spend less, but also those opportunities to build those relationships early, and that way, when it does come time to kind of negotiate at the table, you're able to get him to take a lesser deal because you have such a strong relationship. Same thing in the transfer portal. It works quick. Transfer portal moves quickly. If you're able to evaluate those guys early and can get a jump on some things when they enter the portal, you can reach out immediately and say, "Hey, we see something in you. We want you there. We want you here." That's all important things for Nebraska. So evaluation more important than ever, and I think it's important Nebraska's expanding their staff in this way. Also hired an assistant GM in Logan Holgerson. Of course, if that last name's familiar, that's the son of offensive coordinator Dana Holgerson, a guy that has some experience, was working at Despot Law Firm, most recently working in their marketing department, and was primarily working in the NIL space, primarily working, and previously was working when Dana Holgerson was head coach at Houston, was working with Houston's NIL collective, and was doing some fundraising for them, was doing some outreach and some expansion for them, some evaluation identification as well. And so he's going to help Nebraska staff in that capacity. Also, maybe signals that Dana Holgerson might be here for a bit. Obviously is on staff for the foreseeable future. Did sign a 2-year contract at Nebraska, but with Nebraska 27 quarterback committed, with Dylan Raiola, obviously the quarterback for the next 2+ years at least. It sounds like Nebraska is trying to shore up everything for the foreseeable future, and getting a family member, one that's as qualified as Logan Holgerson, is a good step towards maybe securing Dana Holgerson in town for a bit longer. So intriguing hire. I'm curious to see how Nebraska's kind of strategy evolves moving forward. Of course, the rules in college football are always changing. But as we kind of settle into this rev share era, as we kind of start to turn the page, and they start to turn the page to 27, and moving forward, kind of how do they eval? How do they offer? A lot of these boards aren't really expanded, if you've been reading the early look at the 27 big boards. Some of these boards are not as big as they were in years past. At one point, Nebraska had a pretty expansive 26 wide receiver board, and 26 even running back board. You look to the 27 class, they haven't really started to expand those boards. And part of that is new staffers, guys getting settled in. At running back specifically, I do think E.J. Bartel has an idea of what he wants now. Is kind of just honing in on a handful of guys. But at other positions, defensive line is one where in years past, Nebraska had a deeper board. So I'm excited to see what Nebraska does, how they kind of approach roster building moving forward in this rev share era, because I think that's a strategy that is currently evolving, and um, I don't think there's one right plan necessarily. I think schools across the board just have such varying strategies, and such varying ideas of what they want their rosters to look like, what they want roster strategy to look like. And it's something that's going to be work in progress, something I'm excited to kind of deep dive on as the season progresses and as, we kind of start to see Nebraska get ahead in 27 and close out this 26 cycle. On that note, that'll about do it for us here. We appreciate you guys tuning in. We'll be back with another episode next week. We'll be back with practice coverage through this week at InsideNebraska.com and the Inside Nebraska YouTube channel. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel. We'll see you guys next week.